Hello. This is a presentation in which I try to give some feedback on group paragraphs that students have attempted when looking at the poetry of John Keats for their A2 Literature Coursework this December 2012. While it's on John Keats, I try to give some advice about writing developed paragraphs that could apply to any of your coursework choices. Each paragraph will given these topic sentences or titles, and they explore each paragraph explores this subject in turn. Paragraphs 3 and 4 are split into two sections, so you can scan through to find the paragraphs you're most interested in. Okay, I'm going to try and attempt to talk through these group paragraphs on the A2 coursework. These are paragraphs on Keats. Now, you might want to just pause it and read the paragraph first and then follow it through with the points I'm going to make. I'm going to a lot on this, I think, because I'm thinking as I'm going along. But first thing we can say is a fairly straightforward topic sentence. We're looking at Keats as a realist rather than Keats just exploring his imagination, that all his poems come back to a sort of realism. Maybe they could go a bit further with a second sentence. What is he realistic about? Could be expanded upon. The use of the imagination as an escape from reality, following the conventions of romanticism. Perhaps they could just elaborate with a separate sentence about, well, what are the appropriate conventions of romanticism that are going to be explored in this poem? And that could go a little further. Okay, so they're exploring first of all the Ode to a Nightingale, and remember that the topic sentence is about, well, how is he a realist in this poem? And they put the context of the poem, the song of the Nightingale is an escape from reality, which is his imminent death. Well, he's not just about to die, so we should be a little clearer on the context there. He's thrown back into reality where he's contemplating life and death. Okay, so this is probably a good idea to explore, the idea of where he comes out of his imagination into the reality. And we have one example from the poem, and I think really they should. This deserves probably a little more close analysis of the text. Where is he showing reality, and what kind of reality is it? Before jumping into another critic, I think it's important to give 2 or 3 examples of where the text is showing Keats coming back to reality. Okay, try to avoid quotes within quotes with this 3 quote marks here. It's always good to just summarise what a critic says and then give a quote. This paragraph jumps to an ode to a Grecian urn, a separate poem, and really it would profit to sort of look at the first poem in a little more detail before jumping to a second poem. So it's probably a little weak in close analysis of the first poem, but I can see why they've jumped to a second poem to make a second point, but the danger of that is it's going to be a little superficial. Right, I've kind of underlined points that I was going to explore a little bit here. Keats is aware that his life is short. It's possibly true. Yeah, they could elaborate how, his brother died from tuberculosis. You don't need a huge history section here, but that's maybe a valid contextual point. But then really the essence is in the poem rather than your contextual knowledge. You have to bring it back to the poem. He does not dwell or live in his dreams, because as a realist he realises there's no point. Okay, well this there is no point needs to be backed up by looking at the poem. Here we've moved on to a Grecian urn, so they really need to delve into this. Otherwise this is an assertion without any evidence. There is no point. You have to prove what his attitude is to the real world. by looking at the poem in a bit more detail. It's a little sketchy here, talking about the conventions of Romanticism. Romantic poems didn't necessarily have to have a regular rhyme scheme. In fact, they probably tried to get away from the idea of an ordered world at all, and this is probably incorrect. Probably the weakness here is still the lack of looking in detail at the poems. So my advice here on this one is to deal with one poem in more detail before jumping to another poem. And so here we've got 3 poems on in one paragraph, but rationed to probably one quote from each poem, which is probably not as satisfying as dealing with one poem in more detail, and perhaps in one paragraph dealing mainly with one poem might prove to be more profitable. However, there's a nice kind of conclusion that dreams can't last forever. They're kind of just moments, and that could be explored by looking at the use of time, or how the poem shifts out of imagination into a reality, or how there's kind of clues as to how nothing lasts forever, and which would make that nice conclusion seem more substantial. Okay, this group paragraph is looking at John Keats as a romantic idealist. It should be arguing that his emphasis in his poems is not on realism, but is on the imagination and on dreaming. Okay, the first thing I'm going to say about this paragraph is perhaps there is too much given over to the literary context. We probably could do without this whole first paragraph here. You're going to have 3,000 words, and you're going to have to choose wisely what you use. So I would probably get rid of the whole paragraph, because you don't need the history of Romanticism in your essay. Perhaps you need to be more concise, and maybe this second section here adequately sums up the context of Romanticism, and that way we can get into how John Keats fits into this context a little bit more. So try to be economical with how much context information you're putting in. The danger is your essays will run too long, and you won't have room to analyse the poems themselves, so I would scrap that. This paragraph does need a tighter topic sentence. We have kind of one here about romantic idealism is a naive, miscalculated dream of a perfect world without factoring in the flaws that reality would bring. There's quite a judgment being made about naive and miscalculated dream that maybe sounds more like a conclusion rather than a topic sentence. And really what I'd be looking for in a topic sentence might be, well, John Keats is an idealist, and perhaps why he might be an idealist. And okay, let's look in close detail at where he is an idealist and where his dreams seem to sort of fly away from reality. This paragraph attempts to sort of fit Keats's poem La Belle Dame sans Merci within the sort of romantic tradition, and there is knowledge of this in the sense of its use of fairy tale imagery, and some quotes about the knights and fairy tales and romantic ideas of knights falling in love. But it needs to go further in coming back to the topic sentence of how is he an idealist and perhaps why. But this this paragraph starts to go into sort of listing what the poem does, rather than explaining why. Okay, so we've got, it uses the ballad form as one of the elder styles of poetry, and this relates to the old-fashioned language, making it more natural and genuine. It's a bit vague, so we should avoid those kind of comments. But what I'm not getting out of this analysis is, well, why? What's the poem aiming to do? What's it exploring? It seems to be exploring the states between dreaming and awake. Maybe there's elements of fever, hallucination and imagination, and a blurring of reality, or maybe the transient nature of life. I'm not sure, but the poem itself needs to be explored in a bit more detail. Try to avoid just listing points. One of the main criticisms I have of this paragraph is perhaps the topic sentences. The task was to look at how he's an idealist, but because we lack a clear focus for the paragraph, we're tending to go down to other areas. So what this paragraph here is dealing with is not really how Keats is an idealist at all, but rather that Keats's poems contradict romanticism, that they highlight how love dies out, which is really another argument. It's a valid argument completely, but it's not the argument this paragraph is supposed to be setting out. Yes, there's an argument for showing the opposite side, but maybe in a separate paragraph, or definitely after you've explored and exhausted all the areas to do with how his are works of the imagination. There's too much of a jump to opposing this without really exploring what the topic sentence should be about. And again, topic sentences are really important, because here we start a topic sentence which isn't really a topic sentence, but is rather an example of what his poem does. So it's not really giving the reader a clear idea of where the argument's going in this paragraph. So it's really important that the topic sentences outline the area of analysis, not give a point of analysis as a starting point. I hope that is clear. The final point I'm going to make here is to do with making facts, which it's really hard to substantiate, really. Keats formed mental images with his imagination to cope with his suffering. We can't say that for sure. We could possibly conjecture and say may, but when we bring in context, we should try to be a little more tentative with the points that we're trying to make. Okay, this third paragraph is exploring the Keats's use of dreams, and particularly his use of sensory imagery, which is clearly outlined in the topic sentence. I feel that when students jump to a critic straight away, what that really highlights to the examiner is perhaps a lack of confidence in their own beliefs. So it's never really a good idea to jump straight to a critic. Deal with what you want to say first. Now, this poem deals with the bell down sans merci, and there is some dealing with the poem throughout. There's try to avoid saying due to. I see a lot of students doing this a lot. It always leads to really convoluted sentences. State a fact separately. The thing I want to highlight in this paragraph is the use of quote and then explaining the quote in the same sentence. Try to avoid doing that, because what we have here is quite a a complex point to be made, but in half a sentence. And it really deserves to be in its own sentence with follow-on sentences. So the explanation here is rather cut short, and it should be explored in more detail. And it should then offer up one or two more examples here of the same poem, so that it starts to look like you're exploring it in more detail. To support this view, that Keats attempts to capture the beauty through dreams and imagination. It's quite a valid point, but really it deserves to be explored looking at the first poem you're looking at. But here we jump to another poem, and it kind of leaves the reader a little unsatisfied, in the sense that we could have explored the main poem first. Now, one of the things I want to highlight here in this paragraph is they jump to a new poem, and then they talk about structure straight away, where I think the poem needs a statement of, well, what the poem's about, or what the purpose of John Keats's poem is here, before jumping to structure, because structure is going to illuminate his purpose. So I think the order of exploring that poem is not correct. I think if the topic sentence is about dreams, well, how does Ode to a Grecian Urn explore dreams, and what's John Keats seem to be saying, and then explore how the structure is building on that. The last thing I'm going to highlight here, this paragraph is in two sections, is try to avoid semicolons altogether, use a new sentence there, and elaborate in more detail. Okay, this paragraph continues. I'm not quite sure about this statement about the ABCA pattern, if that's true or not. But what we do see is the writers are trying to engage with the poet's choices and the meanings in the poem. And so we've got some interesting sort of comments about how the structure shows a hesitant approach, and they're relating it to the meaning of beauty and perhaps his emotions at the time, which is a valid point to make. Avoid these semicolons again. But the point I'm going to make here is again about context. Yeah, we know that he died young, and we know that it's possible that he knew he was going to have a terminal illness, and that he was probably ill at the time, but we can't say for certain he was trying to find an outlet for his escape. What I'm trying to write here is try not to turn conjecture into fact. You're awarded for being a more tentative. What that means is you might want to use words like he may be trying to, because the guy's been dead 200 years. You can't say with any certainty that that's what he was doing, but you may suggest that's what he was trying to do. Okay, the final point, this paragraph starts to introduce to Autumn and Ode to Psyche, but the points that are made down here are not really dealing with the poet as his use of dreams, and you could argue it's dealing with his use of sensory imagery, but there's no exploration of dreams in this section. But yes, they are dealing with sensory imagery. I suppose you could split those into separate paragraphs, but again, I don't see how the reference to Ode to Psyche is answering the question about his use of dreams. Okay, and I think you might need to lose that, because it's not really answering the topic question, but maybe you could argue that you're dealing with the sort of sensory imagery here. But you'd argue that is two separate sentences. I think the use of dreams on its own should be dealt with, and that would give more clarity to this particular paragraph. Okay, this is a summary to the dreams paragraph then, and there was some real engagement with structure and trying to bring structure back to meaning, but I leave you with these final points to consider. Okay, this is the fourth and final paragraph. This is looking at the transience of life in Keats's poems and his use of transformations. And we've got a nice clear topic sentence. We go into Ode to a Nightingale. There's some interesting engagement with the poem here, and the idea of how the bird and its wings are seen as a metaphor for escape. And then they link this to perhaps why Keats does this, knowing that he was possibly suffering from TB, that his poems show confrontations with death are juxtaposed with beauty, and so there's a kind of contextual point, and then making a point about his poetry, and that could then go into one of his poems. I don't know if it's such a good idea to sort of touch on Ode to a Nightingale with one point and then jump to another poem. It would be worth exploring how this poem, Ode to a Nightingale, deals with the transience of life in a little more detail before jumping to another poem. It looks a little like the butterfly effect from jumping from flower to flower, and it's not deep analysis that way. However, looking at La Belle Dame sans Merci, there's some nice integrated embedded quotes. And they say Keats romanticizes the image of kings and princes by using the ballad form. But again, why? Why might he be doing this? This paragraph would be interesting if it's perhaps exploring again why he might be doing this. So it might be good to come back to his intentions specifically in this poem. One of the things that could be explored is, he's in love with this girl, or he has a love moment with this girl, but it's transient, it doesn't last. Just like all the other knights probably were enthralled to her, and that this is a moment that is transformed, and then he suffers thereafter. So it could be the exploration of La Belle Dame, La Belle, could be explored in relation to the topic sentence a little bit more in terms of the meaning of the poem. What's the intentions of it? Then we jump back to Ode to a Nightingale, which does question the structure of the paragraph a little bit. It might be worth considering one at a time. This is an example here I've underlined of where it's worth rereading your work, because there's a contradiction here. If the reader turns to be cruelly confronted with death, youth grows pale, is a phrase that exemplifies the immortality of humans. Well, that's kind of not what he's saying there. He's saying that youth does grow pale, we grow old, and we die. That exemplifies the mortality of humans. So do try and read your writing closely, because you pick up these kind of little mistakes all the time. It's a little frustrating when it's a coursework essay to hand in. I think these quotes are referring to how mankind is mortal, but perhaps the bird isn't. The bird's beauty is timeless, which is correct in where they go on to say it. Now, the one point I'm going to make here is that is on this sentence. To Keats, it is the beauty and seemingly timeless effects of nature that have the ability to transform him out of his dull, depressing existence. Beauty has the ability to transform him out of reality. Well, that's an interesting point. I've put a plus sign there, because this is ideally where you come back to the poem and you offer one or two more examples to prove this point. But we don't get that. This needs more analysis of the poem to prove this point, which is a valid point as well. The paragraph kind of ends on a sort of statements of questions that could benefit from just coming back to the poem a little bit more, and showing specifically where do we see this, where are these statements. So try to bring points back to the poem, so you're showing close analysis a little bit more. Otherwise it ends like a kind of speech about poems, which doesn't have a lot of context, doesn't have a lot of analytical depth to it. Okay, this is the last paragraph of the same piece of work, looking at the transience of Keats' poems, and they're looking at To Autumn. Should be a capital A, it's a title, so watch that sort of thing. I would change this topic sentence to link To Autumn back to the main topic, which is about the transience of life. Otherwise, this is quite good. There's lots of embedded quotes looking at how nature is seen in all its ripeness and plumpness and swell. They could talk about the rhythm a little bit more, how it's kind of the long vowel sounds are swell and plump, and oozing, slow down the rhythm, and it sort of gives it a ripeness. The sounds of the words are quite ripe as well, which fits with the meaning, which they highlight here in the topic sentence. However, there's a nice sense of this paragraph highlighting the sort of contradiction in the poem as well, where we get this sort of, I suppose you could say dramatic irony, where the reader knows that these days will cease. And this is kind of relevant to the topic sentence about transience, and is going into a bit more detail about the actual poem in question, so it kind of looks well explored. It's a little vague on structure here, which the last three sentences look a bit vague, so we have to spend a little more time talking about structure. Otherwise, it's good. Okay, so in summary of this paragraph, try to deal with one poem at a time rather than jumping backwards and forwards between different ones. Try to offer follow-on evidence to support points and arguments that you make. So aim to try and say 3 or 4 things about each poem in a paragraph. So in making a point, offer additional evidence in the poem to sort of elaborate and sort of convince. Often the brain's hardwired to think of 3 points as being quite convincing, and 1 point seems quite superficial. Always try and bring structure back, be precise when talking about structure or rhythm or the stanza structure or turning points, and try and relate it back to the meaning in the poem.